Okay. I don't know, maybe given the size, can we ask the people to introduce themselves and say what their interest is?
I think that's a great idea. Let's see. Can we start with Hector? Can you introduce yourself and let us know your background if you have any interest in particular in tonight's topic?
Yes, I've been living in the city of Downey for renting for close to 3 years. So I was just interested in what this actually is. I sort of Googled it and well, so I want to know more about it and interested in hopefully buying a home here. I actually own a home in Santa Fe Springs, so I would like to move to here to Downey. But like I say, I'm renting at the moment and renting my house out to a family.
Okay.
Right.
I'd like to know what opportunities you have here for home buyers.
Okay. And if we can ask Michael to unmute and give us a little bit of information, what you're interested in.
Hello. So basically, I am a former Kaiser Permanente administrator who believes strongly in the social determinants of health. And I have been, ever since, with my father, been doing apartments. And we won the beautification award last year in Downey. And so I'm interested now in sort of what the requirements are for affordable housing and see how I can integrate social determinants of health with new developments that me and my colleagues are interested in.
Hi, Michael. You were at the December 13th presentation, weren't you?
Yeah, and you're the Hollywood Hills woman, right?
I am. So it's the same presentation, just so you know.
Oh, okay. Well, if there's nothing new, then I have a ton of work to do.
It's the same presentation.
Okay, perfect. I will bid you good night then. And
Nice to see you.
nice to see you as well. Can I ask one quick question?
Sure.
Is there another session for developers specifically that's in the works?
That was going to be this meeting. We did want to gear it toward developers only so we can have more of that Q&A.
Yeah.
But because this is a virtual and we didn't have virtual open to the public last time, we did open it up to everybody. And these are the interested participants today.
I see. Okay. So if in the future that developer meeting does happen, we'll get emailed on that?
Yeah, what we can do is we do have your contact information. So it is going to be presented to the Affordable Housing Subcommittee with the City Council. And then if we do move forward with an ordinance, that'll be presented at a City Council hearing. And so we can notify you of all of those dates also.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Good night.
Thanks,
everyone.
Michael. Have a good night.
You too. Good night.
Okay, if we can go to Scott,
That's my back.
that's you. Okay, got it. And then can we go to Yahia?
Hello. I wonder if you guys can hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. My name is Yahia. I live in Downey and was raised in Downey, and I'm a developer, and we have a few project sites in Downey, probably about like 3 different sites, maybe between like 80 to like 100 units, and depending on whatever the inclusionary ordinances come into play and the new housing element, we might have maybe more. So yeah, I hope to participate and see what we can accomplish today. That's my baby. Sorry, guys.
That's all right. At some point, my cat's going to walk through the screen, so it'll be informal.
Thank you.
Okay, and I think that's it for our participants.
Okay, great. Well, this will be informal and personal. Well, they're muted. So I guess what I'll do, this is what I did in December when we did the presentation in person. I'll go through the presentation, and then after I'm done, we can open it up for questions for you guys. And just for a bit of background, so my name's Kathy Head, and I'm president of Kaiser Marston. And we were hired by the city to do the financial and economic analysis of a possible inclusionary housing program or policy. So what the PowerPoint I'm going to go through with you tonight is going to discuss just the basic concepts of inclusionary and then the findings of the report I prepared. I think it's important just to, from the start, to just say no decisions have been made about anything at this point, including whether there'll be an inclusionary housing program. And so what we've done so far is we've prepared a report on feasibility. We had one other session and we're having this session, and then we'll go to Planning Commission and the City Council and present to them. And then ultimately they'll make the decision as to whether there's a program, and if there's a program, what those standards and requirements will be. So I just want you guys to understand that no decisions have been made yet. So just to start off, just to give you the first few slides, just give you context on inclusionary housing programs. So as we sit today in California, there are over 170 cities and counties that have inclusionary housing programs. It's really important to understand that it's just one component of an affordable housing strategy, and that it only provides for a small part of the unmet need in a city or a county, but it is a tool that is very commonly used throughout the state and actually throughout the country more and more. In California, which is all we're going to talk about from here on in, the regional housing need assessment targets are typically used as a starting point when establishing not so much the number of affordable units that will be developed, but how you split the requirement into income categories: very low, moderate income, et cetera. So right now you're working on your new housing element for the next 8 years. And so we have those RHNA requirements, and they've been considered in the analysis that we prepared. The other thing about inclusionary housing, as the state continues to put more and more requirements on jurisdictions, we try to be mindful when we work on inclusionary policies to help to fulfill those requirements. And so one of the more recently imposed requirements by the state is that you can't have a net loss of housing sites. So if you had them identified in your housing element and then for some reason they become developed with something else, the city is required to then figure out another site to capture those identified units. So inclusionary can be one tool to do that. So inclusionary has been around for decades now, and it's been challenged in the courts several times. And there's also been legislation over time about inclusionary. They're very important to understand in sort of the evolution of inclusionary policies in California. I'm not going to dwell on where we've been. I'm going to dwell on where we are. And as we sit, the courts have found that an inclusionary housing requirement cannot be confiscatory, and an inclusionary housing program cannot deprive an owner of a fair and reasonable return on their investment. Now, what's important to understand about that is the courts told us that, but they didn't tell us what that means. So that's pesky. But so what we've done over time, and I've worked on over 30 inclusionary housing policies in the state over time, and I've been on a number of affordable housing committees, and we all work together to try and figure this out. But the notion is that when a jurisdiction is putting together an inclusionary housing program, that they need to be mindful that you need to create a balance between the needs of the city, the needs for affordable housing, and then just that it be viable for a developer to develop after these requirements are imposed. Because if you impose restrictions that are too stringent, then developers just simply won't develop in your community. And so the balance is really important in establishing these requirements. And so the thing that you want to keep in mind in addition to that, then, is just to understand your real estate. And that's part of what my firm is in to do, is to understand the market conditions and what can be feasibly imposed. In our report, there's a study with 80 plus or minus cities and counties in the state of California, and that have inclusionary, and what those requirements are. But for the purposes of Downey, what we've done is we then narrowed that survey down to jurisdictions in Los Angeles and Orange County to get a sense of what your close in cities and counties are doing. So in our report, those jurisdictions are 15 cities. Okay. And now the threshold project size is inclusionary is typically imposed above a certain number of units being developed. So commonly that limit is plus or minus 10 units. In our bigger survey, we actually have cities that do start at 1 unit, so that any project that's developed has some sort of an inclusionary requirement on it. In the Orange County, LA County survey, thresholds as high as 50 units were included, so that a project that had 49 units wouldn't be subject to any inclusionary requirements. But the most common of the 15 was set at 5 or fewer units. 5 units is a pretty typical threshold to set, because the state density bonus also uses 5 units as their threshold. For the income and affordability restrictions that are imposed, so what developers will have to fulfill within their projects, all but one of the jurisdictions in the 15 have requirements that range between 10 and 20% of the units. So if a market rate project had 100 units, then at 10%, there'd have to be 10 affordable units. At 20%, there'd have to be 20 affordable units. So that's how that works in terms of the percentages. So the other test that we look at then is, what income category of households are we going to impose the requirements for? So what we've found over the many inclusionary programs that I've worked on is that, as a general rule, we set the ownership inclusionary requirement at the moderate income level. And that's for a variety of reasons, including the fact that when you get into the low and the very low income categories for ownership, is you have to start thinking about disposable income and the ability to maintain and be viable as a homeowner, in terms of homeowners association, in terms of maintenance of the house, in terms of capital expenditures over time. We've found that inclusionary programs are more successful if the ownership requirement is set at the moderate income level. And then for rental projects or programs, then we typically can look at the deeper affordability levels, because then rent is really the only component of housing expense that you're incurring. Whereas with ownership projects, you've got property taxes, insurance, et cetera, that you have to pay. The next thing we look at in inclusionary is how long the units will be restricted for. Commonly, the requirement is set at 45 to 55 years for ownership units and 55 years for rental units. There are a variety of other restrictions that I've seen around the state, but those are the pretty common covenant periods for the income restrictions. So what you've seen on this table is basically the foundations of an inclusionary program. What you're looking at is, when will a project be subject to the requirement? What percentage of the units will need to be restricted? What income level restrictions will be placed on the project? And how long will those restrictions stay in place? Those are the fundamental components of an inclusionary housing program. And then what we look at after that is, now what are the options for fulfilling those requirements? And one that is very common is including an in-lieu fee option, so that a developer, under certain circumstances as defined in the program, can pay a fee to the city rather than producing affordable units. It tends to be different for rental versus ownership, and we'll talk about that more during this presentation. But as a general rule, an in-lieu fee option of some sort or another is included in an inclusionary program. Okay, so as I discussed, the minimum project size that will trigger the requirements is something that your city council will need to determine that where they want to set that, as they will the target income and affordability standards, as we went through on the survey page. Now, the next thing then we think about with an inclusionary program is that the base level, the threshold is typically to provide the affordable units on site within a market rate project. That's the basic. But by law and by policy, cities and counties are required to provide options and alternatives for ways to provide the affordable housing units. And again, you don't have to provide all of them. You can establish criteria under which they can be provided as options, but you need to have options. There can't just be an on-site requirement. So the run of them, the run of available options are, as I discussed, an in-lieu fee option. The second one is to say, okay, you don't have to provide the units on site within your market rate project, but you can provide them, you can build them in another location, and you can meet that obligation on another site. Another thing to think about, which is an efficient way to do this, one efficient way, there are lots of efficient ways, but an efficient way to do this is to say, all right, if you're building an ownership housing project, you can fulfill your inclusionary requirement by building a rental project somewhere else within the vicinity of your site and apply the income restriction for rental units in that project. And then typically that's then at a deeper affordability level. The last two are not that commonly used for a variety of reasons. Land dedication would be a developer, rather than providing the affordable units, excuse me, would dedicate land to the city, and then the city would have the responsibility for finding a developer to produce the requisite number of affordable housing units. And the last one is the acquisition and substantial rehabilitation of existing units. From a policy perspective, that's a very popular option because it helps revitalize neighborhoods, it helps create a better housing stock, and it doesn't add to development. The problem with acquisition and rehab projects in terms of an inclusionary program is your general first priority is attempting to meet your RHNA goals. And it is very difficult to count acquisition and rehab projects towards your RHNA goals. So while from a policy perspective, it has many advantages, it doesn't meet that primary objective of helping you fulfill your RHNA goals. But that becomes a policy decision again. Okay, so as I mentioned, as generally inclusionary housing programs set the affordability requirement at the moderate income level. And just to give you context, and 2022 numbers are not out yet. They won't be out probably till May-ish. In 2021, a moderate income family of 4 can have income of up to $96,000. So that's the group, the income group that would be served by a moderate income inclusionary housing requirement. So as I mentioned, that tends to be the standard for ownership housing projects. The state legislature created an opportunity for cities and counties to impose inclusionary housing requirements on rental projects. In 2009, there was a court case that said that cities and counties could not impose inclusionary housing requirements on rental projects. So the state stepped in a couple years ago and created a statute that said, yeah, you can. But within that bill, which was AB 1505, they also gave guidance that said the affordability level shouldn't be more stringent than low income, which is defined as 80% of the area median income, which is AMI there. They didn't say you couldn't, but they do provide some threats in a technical memorandum that they prepared, that it gives the Housing and Community Development Department of the state of California the opportunity to come in and make you prove that you haven't, the city, not you, the person listening, to prove that you haven't created a constraint to housing development. And so, especially in this housing element year, you really don't want HCD in your city saying, you've created this requirement, it's going to stymie development, we're not going to approve your housing element. I mean, that's essentially the threat. So for on-site production within a market rate project of rental units, we, Kaiser Marston, are recommending that that requirement be set at low income at 80% of AMI. Now, if a developer is going to fulfill the requirement offsite, then I think you're free to set the standard at a more stringent level. Also, and this is an important distinction, the state density bonus law has changed really every year for the last many years, and it's made it more and more advantageous for a developer to use. And the most recent legislation allows a developer to get up to a 50% density bonus if they set aside 15% of the base zoning units for very low income households. So if an inclusionary housing program is adopted, it's very likely that the developers of some or all rental projects that can efficiently do it, from a physical standpoint, will opt to use the density bonus, the state density bonus. And in that event, what happens is the affordable units that are provided to fulfill the density bonus also need to count towards the fulfillment of a city's inclusionary requirement. So there's a strong incentive, if an inclusionary housing program is adopted, for it to, in turn, to ask for a state density bonus. And so in that case, it's very, very likely that rather than getting low income units to fulfill your inclusionary requirement, you'll get very low income units to fulfill your inclusionary requirement, and you won't run afoul of the HCD guidance. Okay, so I ran a couple in my report, there's a much longer discussion of it, but I ran prototype projects to test the feasibility of inclusionary housing requirements on ownership projects and on rental projects. So the first prototype is of a condominium project and this is to give you a sense of the affordability gap between market rate prices and affordable prices at the moderate income level. And so the prototype is a 1.65 acre site at a density of 24 units the acre. So that equates to 40 units. And that 40 units, based on market work that I did in the community and the product types being developed, the project has units ranging from 2 to 4 bedrooms. I used code compliant parking. I kept the density where I kept the density at 24 units the acre, so that it could still be served by attached garages at grade. And there were projects that met this criteria within the city. So looking at the chart, you'll see that the market rate price, let's just take the 3-bedroom unit. The market rate price is $650,000. The statutorily set moderate income price for a 3-bedroom unit, when I did the analysis, was $390,100. A lot of variables go into the affordable sales price, most notably mortgage interest rate, property taxes, insurance, homeowners association. So the affordable sales price changes, well, theoretically it could change every day, but what I tend to do in the programs that I've helped implement is to have that price set quarterly. So when I did this analysis, the affordable price was $390,100. So the market rate price was $650,000. The affordable price is $390,100. So the affordability gap, the gap between the two, is $259,900. So each affordable unit that is provided in the project effectively reduces a developer's revenue by $259,900. Remembering back to what I said earlier about the requirement can't be confiscatory and it can't deprive an owner of a fair return on investment, and recognizing that there will be an impact by the creation of an affordable housing requirement, is that is all balanced together, and in the analysis, I have a much more detailed evaluation, is my analysis indicated that a 10% moderate income requirement could be imposed on ownership projects. So just looking at In-Lieu fee, just, because that's an option that's commonly offered. If you go back to the table before where I had the 2, 3, and 4 bedroom units, the weighted average affordability gap per unit was $238,000. So every affordable unit spread across the unit mix, the gap was $238,000. At a 10% requirement, if you just impose that fee over every single unit in the project, because there are no affordable units in the project and they're paying a fee in lieu of producing the units, that fee would be $23,800. If you, instead of charging it per unit, charged it per square feet of sellable area within that, within that project, then it would be $15.90 per square foot. I actually prefer a per square foot measurement because then small units pay less and large units pay more. And it's just more equitable to the developers of those projects because the larger units tend to be more expensive than the smaller units. And so if you just charge a blanket $23,800 per unit, people building larger units will get a break. People building smaller units will take a bigger hit. Okay, the apartment development affordability gap analysis is more complicated than the ownership, because in ownership, you just subtract market price from affordable price, and you've got affordability gap. So if you look at this table, what you'll see is what I did to trying to make it less complicated, and I'm not sure I've succeeded, but trying to make it less complicated is I took the rents. And so the first part of the chart is the rents at the market rate versus the rents at very low income. Then it's the rents at market rate versus the rents at low income. And then it's the market rents versus moderate income. So if we, again, let's just start with the 2 bedroom units. The market rent is estimated at $2,934 per month. And so if you look across that line on the chart, it's $2,934 in each box for the market rate. So in 2021, the affordable rent, the very low income rent for a 2 bedroom unit was $820. So that gap per month is $2,114. When you move to the low income, instead of being $820 rent, it's $1,000. So the tenant would pay $1,000 rent. And so then instead of being a $2,114 gap, the gap becomes $1,934. So the low income unit generates less of a gap than the very low income unit. Then if you move to the moderate income level, then the affordable rent goes up to $1,900. So at that point, it's, your gap has fallen dramatically to $1,034. So as you can see, this is just to give you context on what these affordable housing requirements do to the revenues generated by a project. So then in the bottom line of this chart, I converted it to the value of the apartment unit. If you were going to sell the apartment unit, what would its value be based on these rents? So again, if you look at the market rate units, you'll see that it's $453,000 is the estimate across the board. That's just the market rate unit value. Now, as you can see, when you take, and it's the mix of the 1, 2, and 3 bedrooms, the value of the very low income units is $32,000. So you have a gap of $421,000 per affordable unit if you put a very low income requirement on the project. So that's each affordable unit generates that gap. For the low income units, that gap falls to $385,000. And for the moderate income units, it falls to $203,000. Okay, so then I ran apartment development prototypes. And again, on the small project scenario and on the R3 project, I wanted to create an environment where you didn't have to do structured parking. And then on the specific plan District 5, I went up to a higher density that does require structured parking. And so you can see the units. The small project has 10 units. The R3 zoning project has 48 units. And the specific plan District 5 project has 80 units. Then I, again, using prototypes. This was all based on prototypes based on market research I did in Downey. This is all Downey specific. The mix on the small projects is 5 units, 2 bedrooms, 5 units, 3 bedroom. And then in the R3 zoning, it's dominated by 2 bedroom units with some 1 bedrooms and 3 bedrooms. And then the same thing in the specific plan district. I showed each of these scenarios and I looked at each of these scenarios just because of the diversity of projects that are anticipated to be developed and that have been developed in Downey. So if you look at then the bottom line of this chart, what you'll see, and this is important, is I measured what the inclusionary requirement could feasibly be based on the analysis. And as you can see, for the small project, it can only support a 2% very low or low requirement. And it can only support a 5% moderate income requirement. And some of that is because small projects take a disproportionate hit by an affordability requirement because there aren't more market rate units to spread that impact across. As you get into the slightly larger project, the 48 unit project, a 5% very low or low requirement can be supported and an 11% moderate income requirement can be supported. When you get into the specific plan District 5, which has the higher density and is the bigger project, 5% very low income or 6% low income can be supported and 13% moderate income. So that just gives you the range of feasible requirements to be imposed in an inclusionary housing program, assuming that a developer has not made use of the state density bonus. So on the next table, I ran the project maximizing the state density bonus. And so if a project sets aside 15% of its base zoning units for very low income households, and that is it's the mathematically best scenario to use for state density bonus, just the way it was structured, is then they could get a 50% density bonus, 50. And so, for example, in the small project scenario, if they provide 2 very low income units, they can get a 50% density bonus. In the R3 zoning, if they provide 8 very low income units, they can get a 50% density bonus. And in the specific plan District 5, if they provide 12 very low income units, they can get a 50% density bonus. So what happens is you end up, instead of on the small project, instead of having 10 units, you have 15 units, right? Of which 2 are very low income. So 13 market rate units, 2 very low income units. In the R3 zoning scenario, you end up with 72 total units, of which 8 units are very low income, which means 64 units are market rate. And in the specific plan scenario, you end up with 120 units, of which 12 units are very low income. And so 108 of them are market rate. So as you can see, and I know this is throwing a ton of numbers at you and it's hard virtually on top of everything, so I apologize for that. But what you can see is that the density bonus provides a significant number of additional market rate units in return for providing affordable units. And if you take that a step further and say, and there's an inclusionary housing requirement that you have to fulfill, then the value created by the density bonus really helps out. And in a way, it was intended to do that. It's intended to create a carrot to go along with the requirement. The financial analysis I did then supported in each case at least a 15% very low income requirement. So the density bonus goes a long way towards mitigating the impacts created by an affordable housing requirement in an inclusionary program. Forgetting the density bonus now, going back to just the base zoning, if you look at the affordability gaps that I discussed 2 charts ago, and you assume it's a low income requirement, then the in-lieu fee or the affordability gap is $203,000 a unit, which equates to $22,300 per total unit in the project. Again, because there are no affordable units in the project, it's 100% market rate. And based on, and the average apartment size in the prototype was 950 square feet, just for your benefit. And so the fee per square foot of leasable area is $23.50 per square foot. Okay, so these are the decisions that are going to be faced by the city council when this comes to them. Is one is, how do they want to structure the in-lieu fee? And then how do they want to allow it to be paid under what circumstances? But assuming that they will allow an in-lieu fee in some circumstances, then the question is, how will that fee be set? The most common way is to use the affordability gap, which I've focused on in this presentation. However, if the city council wishes to really encourage developers to pay the in-lieu fee, in some instances, then the in-lieu fee is set at a discounted amount so that there's an advantage to selecting the in-lieu fee. And then the third way, which is also common, is to have an in-lieu fee, a base in-lieu fee, but to create a schedule for small projects that's lower, recognizing that smaller projects take a bigger hit from an inclusionary housing requirement. The other fulfillment options that I discussed briefly at the beginning, but I'll go over in more depth now and discuss the options that the city council will be considering, is one, what can be done on larger sites is that the site could be subdivided so that the market rate project is developed on one site and the affordable unit is same site, but it's been parcelized, can be developed on the other site. Keeping in mind that on-site production within a market rate project is always the base alternative. It's always the base alternative. So any other option you provide, you can impose restrictions that are more stringent than what you did on units are provided in the market rate project, because you're providing an option rather than a requirement. So the next option is off-site production of affordable units. So then you have a market rate project, and then on another site, you've created a whole nother project where you've created these units required to fulfill the inclusionary housing requirement. In that case, even if the project is an ownership project, the market rate project, in some programs, and in most that I recommend, is that you can allow the inclusionary units to be provided in rental units. The other thing to think about in all the requirements, including on-site, is the unit comparability. So the units have to be the same size. Do they have to have the same finishes? Do they have to have the same number of bedrooms? Where do they have to be located? All those are decisions that will have to be made as part of the creation of an inclusionary housing program. And then on the off-site production is, how close to the market rate project does the city council want the requirement to be imposed? And there are a lot of issues associated with that will need to be considered. If the city council decides that they want a land dedication option, so where a developer gives land to the city, then it's really important to structure that carefully so that the site is capable of being developed efficiently with a housing project, and that it's reasonably close to the market rate project, so you don't create an island of affordable housing in the city. And so you want to try, one of the ideas in inclusionary is to spread the affordable units throughout town rather than in any single place. And then thinking about acquisition and rehab, a couple things to think about that are important is when you acquire and rehabilitate existing units, you will be displacing existing units, or at the very best, you'll just have the same units, but you won't have created any more opportunities for housing in the community. And in the acquisition and rehab can create an overconcentration of affordable units in a location or a part of town. That is in addition to the fact that you can't get RENA credit for them. So we're so close to being done. So the recommendations, the preliminary recommendations that came out of the Kaiser Marston study was one, and these are going back over the general requirements that I've been talking about throughout this presentation. The first one being threshold project size. So my recommendation is to set the threshold at 5 or more units, which is the same threshold as the state density bonus uses. However, what happens is, and if you remember back a few slides, on the apartment development, we were getting supportable percentages like 2 and 5%. And that means that if you have 10 or fewer units, you can't get a full unit, because 2% of 10 is less than a unit. And so what I suggest is if the city wants to make, required development of a unit, then the threshold project size should be set at 11 or more units. In that way, then you can get a full unit required. And or you can allow projects with 10 or few units to pay the in-lieu fee by right. And that solves that problem, especially if you then create a schedule of discounted fees for the threshold to 10. Excuse me. Okay, so ownership housing development recommendations are to impose a 10% moderate income requirement. If the project is developed on site within the market rate project, it should be, the affordable unit should have the same bedroom mix as the market rate units have. They don't necessarily have to be as big, but they should have the same number of bedrooms. I'm also suggesting that if offsite development is allowed, that it be required to be rental units. So not an option, that it just should be required. There are a variety of reasons that rental units are more conducive to inclusionary housing, most notably that they're owned by one party, they're managed by one party. People move in, people move out. They don't have expectations of increases in value that can't really be achieved in ownership affordable units. So my recommendation is to maximize the number of rental affordable units that are created. Another important fact is my recommendations are simply that. The city council gets to make all their own policy decisions for whatever meets their objectives, but this provides context for their decisions. And then in-lieu fee payment should be based, now this is ownership housing development. In my opinion, again, I think in-lieu fees should be very usable for ownership housing development for the same reasons I just talked about before. But that is definitely a policy decision for the city council to take. For the length of the covenant, I'm recommending 45 years. Another structure that is often used is to allow the unit to still have a 45-year covenant, but allowed to be resold at an unrestricted basis, with the city receiving an equity appreciation share on the sale. The difference between the two is if you have a irrevocable covenant, then for 45 years, the house has to be sold and resold at an affordable price. So you keep that unit in the inventory, which satisfies an objective. If you do the second, what happens is it provides an opportunity for a household who purchased a unit to gain a portion of the appreciation when they go to sell that unit. And it creates a funding source for the city to assist in rental projects. So that's the decision that needs to be made in terms of the covenant period for ownership units. For apartment development, my recommendation is to impose an 11% moderate income requirement. However, I think it's very important to understand that I believe that if an 11% moderate income requirement is imposed, that a significant number of developers will opt voluntarily to provide 15% very low income so that they can take advantage of the state density bonus. As I mentioned earlier, and I'll make clearer now, say a developer provides 15% very low income units, the city has to count that towards fulfilling the 11% moderate income requirement. So the same units, the very low income units, would count to fulfill the moderate income requirement. So that's important to understand. And the reason I recommend the 11% is because it's just the strongest result from the financial feasibility analysis. And I think it'll generate the largest number of affordable units ultimately. The fulfillment options are, again, they're very similar to the ownership project, which is same mix of bedrooms as you'd find in the market rate project, development of inclusionary units in close proximity to the market rate project. And in the case of apartments, I think it should be hard to pay the in-lieu fee. I think the in-lieu fee, because I think apartments are the most efficient way to provide the affordable housing units. So I would recommend that in-lieu fee payments only be allowed in demonstrated cases of extreme hardship. The covenant period, until recently, it was really common to have a 55-year requirement. It's imposed by a lot of the other assistance funding sources. What I've run across lately in a number of communities I've been working in is a desire to have the requirement to go on forever. And so, again, this is going to be a city council decision. The only thing that I would say as a caveat to that is if a perpetual requirement is going to be imposed, there should be a way to get out of that perpetual requirement. If at some point in the future where that project is just no longer a residential area. So if the city has changed character over time, so now suddenly it's a commercial area than a residential area, you don't want the city council to be hamstrung from being able to say, okay, we're going to take that covenant off now and allow commercial development. But as long as the property is residential and for a minimum of 55 years, it would be subject to the affordable requirements. So if the area never changes character, it would be a perpetual requirement. It'd be a forever requirement. And that's it. Kind of an anticlimactic finish. So everybody still with me?
We're here. I guess what we can do right now is if anybody has questions, if you can raise your hand and then we can take any questions, or if you had any comments that you wanted us to discuss a little bit further. Okay, so it looks like Yahia raised his hand. So Yahia, did you want to start us off?
Yeah, hi, thank you. That was very informative. I just have a couple general questions. Do we have like a projected average project size with the new housing element? What we think, what maybe they're going to be coming in at?
You mean the unit size or the number of units?
The number of units per project.
Oh, that's for you.
Well, yeah, we don't have a projected number of units, again, because all of our sites are very different. So some could be smaller sites and some can be up to maybe 100 units on a site. So it would really depend on what the site actually is. We don't have an estimated number right now.
But you have a total.
The total goal that we have to show that we can accommodate is 6,525 units. And we do have the draft housing element along with the sites inventory that lists every single address. There's about 400 addresses that are included in that sites inventory to show we're going to reach that 6,500 number.
Oh, you're muted again if you're asking another question.
Okay, let's see. Let's go to Don. Do you want to unmute yourself and let us know what question or comment you had?
Hello, thanks for the great presentation. This is going to be recorded, right? So we can review it later on. Is that right?
Yes.
Fantastic. It's a lot of information to kind of digest a lot of the math, which I like. One of the questions I had, a couple. One is, it seems like on the smaller, I agree that is it regardless of the size of the project, that if a person just wanted to build whatever they're allowed to build, a market rate number of units, that they're going to have to pay some type of a fee? Or is every property, once the number is set, whether it's 5 units or 10 units or 11 units, is every property that's that large that can accommodate those number of units, if somebody didn't want to build that number of units, they're going to be fined or have to pay this fee if they don't want to build those types? Am I understanding it right, the way the inclusionary thing works?
Right. So depending on, well, it's not a fine, it'd be a choice. But depending on where the city council ends up setting the threshold. So for example, if they set it at 5 units, then anything below 5 units wouldn't be subject to a requirement or a fee. If they
Okay,
set it at 10 units, then same difference, anything 9 or fewer wouldn't be subject to either. Or if they set it, say, at 5 units, but then, or say if they set it at 10 units, and then allowed a fee to be paid instead of producing the unit, I would then recommend that that fee be graduated downward so that if you were a 4-unit project, you're spending less per square foot of building area than if you're a 9-unit project. So not only would you have a lower fee because there are fewer units, you'd have a lower fee because just trying to create a discount.
yeah, I'm just trying to think of like, for motivation as far as the city, making the city desirable to want to come build in. And so, the small builders, when they have to get involved in fees and choices, it gets complicated, for the smaller builders versus a larger builder. I have several parcels that could be larger projects. But I was just thinking of, the comparison. Sometimes when you get the larger density bonus, it drives the cost of construction up because you no longer you can't fit the extra density bonus units in 2-story, even 3-story. So now you're going to 4-story. If you go higher than 4-story, now there's a cost of the steel and the post-beam construction and all this versus conventional on grade or subterranean. So some of the savings or some of the benefit to those extra density bonus units gets wiped out by the extra cost of the construction. So
No, that's right.
There could be some size of units where it would make sense, even though I would like to build the larger number of units, because it shifts to the different type of construction economically, it'll drive me to build lesser units economically. Does that make sense?
100%. No, that absolutely makes sense. And it is, I agree with every single thing you said, so I'm not going to repeat it.
Sure.
And that is, I think, the argument for where the threshold should be set.
Right. I got you. Yeah, it's a tricky thing. And then what do you do in some cases? Because I've done some over the years where I've built townhomes, condominiums, where I want to create, like a home feel instead of an apartment feel. And I'll map them and I'll set them up so in 10 years, 20 years, or whenever we want to, we could sell them. But our intention is not to sell them. We're building them to rent them, but we want to have the option to sell them for ownership. So how would that kind of project be? Would there be some other agreements? Have you ever done something like that before?
Yeah, no, I've done it. And in fact, over the last several years, I've done it on every program I've worked on because there's a lot of mapping going on just to hold out for the 10-year tort period. So in Long Beach, that's happened a ton where there's a variety of reasons to want to rent.
Sure.
But one is to wait for the 10-year construction defect period to end.
Yep.
So, I mean, there's a variety of ways to do it. The way I've been doing it commonly is to set it up as a rental restriction when you build the project, even if it's mapped. And then when you go, and if you go to turn it into an ownership project, then what happens is there's a methodology set up, and it varies from program to program, but there's a methodology set up for what happens to the tenants in the affordable units, whether they be allowed to stay and you have apartment units in a condo project, or whether they then have to be relocated and then selling the units to moderate income households. But there's definitely, if you look at Long Beach, it's actually structured, but there's a variety of ways to do it.
Okay, that makes sense. Great, thank you.
Sure.
Is there anybody else that had a question, just general information or needed clarification on anything? Okay, so we're not seeing any more hands being raised right now. I do want to give you the opportunity to let us know what questions pop up for you. The information should be on the city's website. I believe we were getting that up this week. If not, I'll confirm that everything has already been up. The PowerPoint should be shared. The recent study, I believe the draft form should be posted. So all of that information is there. If not, feel free to email me and I apologize, it's a long email. C Landavando, so CLAN. My last name is written up on the screen, so it's my first initial last name at downeyca.org. Let us know, and I can make sure we get that sent over to you directly. Let's see, Yahia, can you unmute?
Yeah, thanks, Crystal. Just one more question.
Sure.
Rehabbing existing units. What if the owner owns the units already, doesn't have to purchase them? He already owns existing units and he plans to develop a project.
I don't understand. Can you maybe just provide an example of what you're saying?
So if the owner submits a project to develop, but he also owns multiple rental apartments in the city as well, and then he wants to elect to rehab his own units that he already owns as part of the inclusionary.
That'll be a city council decision. That'd fall under the rehab requirement. There are some cities that allow that to count. The issue will become, so I'm not going to pre-decide what any council member is going to, decide, but it won't count for their RENA requirements. And so that's an impediment to doing that. I think Don has another question.
Yeah, Don.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, great. Yeah, I forgot to ask you about the parking. I noticed it said 2.5 across. When we get into the density bonuses and we're trying to design with architects, does the density bonus with the state, does it reduce some of that parking requirement? Does it
Yes.
drop some, or
Yes.
how did that?
Yeah.
It does.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Yahia, did you have another question for us, or? Okay, so I'll go ahead and just run through what we believe our next steps are going to be. And again, if you guys have any other questions, go ahead and pop those hands up again. So what we're looking at right now is, again, we have to report back. We've been taking notes of some of the comments that we're hearing and the concerns from our local developers. We're going to report back to the Affordable Housing Subcommittee that the City Council had developed a while ago for these types of items. We'll present to them, and then we'll get direction from them as to whether or not they want to move forward with staff preparing an ordinance. And if so, what items should be included in that ordinance. So we're going to present to them the way we did to you, what all of the options are, and then we'll see which ones should be incorporated in there. And if we do begin to develop an ordinance, then again, we'll notify everybody again, letting you know that we are developing an ordinance. We'll definitely allow chance for review and feedback before it is presented to the City Council. When it's presented to the City Council, I'm sure at that point there's going to be an additional opportunity to share your thoughts. But again, my email, my contact is always there. If there's questions that pop up after the fact, you're thinking of something next week, feel free to reach out to me and we can go ahead and discuss it. Okay, so then if that is it and nobody else has any other questions, then I do want to thank Kathy again for a very great presentation and a very thorough analysis of what our current conditions are. And thank you again to everybody who did take time out of your day or evening to join us for this item. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Okay, bye.